New York Times national security correspondent David Sanger covered the nuclear summit with North Korea. He wrote, quote, if Mr. Trump allows this negotiation to become about limiting the North's capabilities rather than eliminating them, he will repeat the moves that he castigated Mr. Obama for making in Iran. If he insists on getting it all, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, he risks coming up empty-handed. Sanger is also a best-selling author. His new book is The Perfect Weapon: War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. It goes inside the rise of cyber warfare and how cyber attacks are reshaping global power. David Sanger, good morning.
Great to be back.
Great to have you here. We're going to get to this book because it's, I think, just as scary as a nuclear threat in some ways. But first, because you've covered North Korea for decades, this idea, will Trump eventually get to that complete and verifiable stage?
I'd be surprised if he does. Look, I applaud the effort to go meet Kim Jong Un. We've tried one method here for 35 years of dealing with the North Koreans. It's failed every time. So why not try having the leaders meet and try this from the top down? I think what Kim Jong Un is trying to get to is an arms control agreement, something in which he will maintain a minimum force that he knows will keep the world from overthrowing his regime. And that's what the United States has said it would never settle for.
Almost like Pakistan.
Almost exactly like Pakistan.
But the president said there's no longer a nuclear threat when he came home and tweeted that. Do you think that's true?
I think it was somewhat remarkable. It was a good meeting. It's good to have changed the tone. Nothing has really changed on the ground yet in North Korea. They still have the same number of weapons they had beforehand. It would be a little bit like President Kennedy after meeting Khrushchev for the first time saying the Soviet threat was over, or Reagan after meeting with Gorbachev.
Well, and it's also been a long time criticism for anybody who declares peace in our time too quickly, both for the last 60, 70 years of history. Tell me this, David. We had Condoleezza Rice on this show, and she said the test for inspections are snap inspections. We heard a lot about that with respect to the Iran deal. So inspecting the nuclear program of North Korea, how do you think that'll go forward, and is that the next big question?
She's right. It's snap inspections, but it's also inspections everywhere, anytime, in a country that is full of tunnels, full of hidden locations, and this is going to be the hard part. And it may explain why Secretary Pompeo was so snappish with a reporter on his plane the other day when they started asking about verification.
David, the North Koreans have already successfully carried out an attack against the United States under Kim Jong Un, a cyber attack, and that's what you write about.
That's right. You know, what's happened with cyber, Norah, is that in the years since the U.S. did the big attack on Iran's nuclear plant, what's called Stuxnet, or Operation Olympic Games was the name for it, we have seen an explosion of cyber used by different states as a short-of-war way of attacking other nations. And the North Koreans are a great example of it, because if you do this subtly enough, you can avoid retaliation. So they took out 70% of Sony Pictures' computer systems, right? Damage. But they got basically sanctions in return.
And the reason you avoid retaliation is A, it's hard to figure out exactly who's at fault, but also isn't it B, that the U.S. is incredibly vulnerable, and if you get in a back and a forth, we who depend on our cyber world could be in bad shape.
That's absolutely right. And the more I got into the reporting for the book, which really comes out of reporting I've done for the Times over the years, I was struck by the fact that American presidents are very concerned about striking back because of our continued vulnerabilities. And the biggest example here was President Obama in trying to figure out how to deal with Vladimir Putin in the middle of the 2016 election. You know, and every time somebody would come to him with a proposal, and it's full of them here, cut off the Russians from the world financial system, go after Putin's own money, he'd say, well, what if he comes back on election day in the election machines, which they knew he was already probing?
But David, part of the problem, I love the title of the book, The Perfect Weapon, and it is that because there's no visual evidence that a great crime has been committed. But you said we've got to rethink secrecy. America prides itself on secrecy and not sharing what we know and how we do it. You said we have to do that a different way now.
In some ways, Gayle, the classification surrounding cyber is one of the biggest reasons that we've got a continued threat.
Right.
It's one of the first weapons that was ever developed by the intelligence community, and they're naturally secretive, and I understand that, and they don't want to reveal the ways that we both defend ourselves and do offense. But it gets into a big problem, and the big problem is that if you don't begin to talk about your capabilities, if you don't talk about what you may do in return, you've created no deterrence at all. And you never can set rules about what's off limits. If we wanted to say election systems are off limits, we'd have to then commit that we're not going to attack someone else's election systems. And believe it or not, there are people in the U.S. government who would raise objections to that.
Wow.
Yeah, you call it a cyber Pearl Harbor in the making. It's very, very scary stuff, but important.
Yeah, great reporting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Great to be back.
You really take us behind the scenes. Thank you, David Sanger. The Perfect Weapon will go on sale Tuesday, wherever you like to buy your books.